The galaxy stirred with whispers, a murmur that grew into a roar within the criminal underworld. A bounty had been placed, not on a politician, not on a warlord, but on a single human. The figure attached to the contract was staggering, enough to make even the most cautious hunters reconsider their safety margins. No one knew why this particular human warranted such a reward, but for most, the reason was irrelevant. Credits spoke louder than caution. On the lawless station of Karis, 9, where syndicates brokered deals in the shadows and mercenaries nursed old wounds, 3 figures took immediate notice. Zarkath the Void Reaper, a warlord whose cybernetic body enhancements made him more machine than flesh, bared his jagged teeth in something close to a grin. He thrived on spectacle, on bloodshed, and he considered the hunt a mere formality before the inevitable kill. Cethix 9 was less emotional. The insectoid assassin stood in the corner of a dimly lit bar, unmoving as he absorbed the details. His hive mind sent pulses of information across his neural network, thousands of distant drones analyzing the implications of the bounty. He preferred clean eliminations, but the sheer size of the reward made efficiency a secondary concern. Drathos, known as the Bloodhound, had no need for cybernetic enhancements or genetic modifications. He had built his legend with raw instinct and relentless pursuit. A natural predator, he didn't need to boast or bellow like other hunters. Instead, he simply memorized the name and vanished into the crowd, already mentally charting his quarry's most likely escape routes. Their target, Sergei Mikhailov, a name that meant nothing to them. His file was sparse, no known affiliations, no political ties, no major criminal record. To the uninformed, he appeared to be an unremarkable human, stranded on Vokr 7, a barren, dust-ridden world that served as a haven for those avoiding scrutiny. He was alone, without backup, without resources. An easy kill, but the files were wrong. The transport vessel that had taken Sergei to Vokr 7 was still cooling on the outskirts of a derelict mining settlement when he stepped onto the hardened ground. He moved with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to hostile environments. His posture relaxed but his eyes constantly scanning. He had spent years perfecting this balance, the art of appearing insignificant while mapping every escape route, identifying potential threats before they became immediate dangers. He had known this bounty was coming the moment he had spotted the wrong kind of attention in a backwater trading post weeks ago. The stares held too much calculation, the casual questions veiled a little too thinly. That was the problem with operating in the shadows for too long. Eventually, something followed you out. Sergei had hoped to avoid this confrontation, but hope was a luxury he had never relied on. He didn't need a bounty alert to tell him what was coming. He had seen the pattern before. Hunters would come, and they would die. The first wave would be the eager ones, the reckless killers chasing fortune without understanding the weight of their pursuit. They would rush in, confident in their firepower and their numbers. Sergei had killed their kind before. The real threats would come later, those patient enough to watch and learn. He had no intention of letting them get that far. Vokr 7's settlement was barely functional, a handful of crumbling structures that had once supported a thriving mining operation. Now it was a haven for the lost, the lawless, and the forgotten. Sergei walked its dirt paths without urgency, making a mental inventory of its layout. A half-functional comms tower, abandoned tunnels beneath the surface, water stores locked behind reinforced metal gates, defensible positions. He hadn't come here to hide. He had come here to prepare. Zarkath arrived first, predictably brash. His heavy boots crushed loose gravel underfoot as he strode through the settlement, his cybernetic limbs gleaming under Vokr 7's weak twin suns. He didn't bother with subtlety, didn't ask questions. He made his presence known, expecting Sergei to be like every other target. Frightened, desperate, cornered. He found none of those things. A motion-triggered explosive turned the alley into a firestorm of shrapnel and concussive force. Zarkath's reinforced plating saved him from immediate death, but he was unbalanced, his sensors scrambled. That was when Sergei struck. He moved like a shadow, close and lethal, a jagged combat knife in one hand as he tore through the gaps in Zarkath's armor. The cybernetic enhancements made the warlord strong, but they also made him predictable. Sergei didn't fight strength with strength, he fought with precision. Zarkatha's last moments were not loud, not grand. A severed artery, a failed neural relay. He collapsed before his systems could process that he had lost. Sergei wiped his blade clean and disappeared before the dust settled. The death sent a ripple through the underworld. Spetsnaz, who had been methodically dissecting the settlement through his network of drones, adjusted his strategy. He had planned to lure Sergei into an ambush, to isolate and overwhelm him. But that approach assumed Sergei was an ordinary man. Sergei was not ordinary. Spetsnaz deployed his drones in waves, searching the ruins for heat signatures, scanning for anomalies. He didn't realize Sergei had already anticipated him, had already deduced his methods. The first drone short-circuited mid-air, its sensors overloaded by an unexpected electromagnetic pulse. The next suffered a precise, silent sniper shot through its central processing unit. One by one, the swarm fell, and Spetsnaz's vision narrowed. By the time he realized he was the prey, not the hunter, it was too late. Sergei found him alone, without his network, without his advantage. The assassin's chitinous exoskeleton cracked under a single suppressed bullet. Drathos, watching from a distance, saw everything. He had been prepared for a challenge. He had expected resistance. He had not expected this. The bounty had turned into something else entirely. This wasn't a simple kill order. This was a carefully laid trap, and Sergei had set it long before the first hunter arrived. Drathos didn't run. He didn't call for reinforcements, not yet. Instead, he stepped back into the shadows and watched. Because unlike the others, he wasn't here just for the money. He needed to understand. Who was Sergei Mikhailov? And why had someone paid a fortune to see him dead? Drathos moved carefully through the ruins of Valkyr 7's settlement, his boots silent against the compacted dirt. The bodies of Zarkath and Spetsnaz had not been left as warnings. There were no messages carved into their remains, no trophies taken. Sergei Mikhailov wasn't interested in making a statement. He was eliminating threats with calculated efficiency. That was more concerning than any show of brutality. Drathos had hunted men like this before, killers forged in war, but even among them, Sergei was something different. The way he had dismantled two of the most dangerous bounty hunters in the system suggested patience, discipline, and worst of all, preparation. He wasn't running. He was waiting. Still, Drathos was no fool. He had watched the others charge in, blinded by greed and arrogance, and he had learned from their mistakes. Unlike them, he wouldn't underestimate Sergei. He had already called in reinforcements, syndicate enforcers, men accustomed to bloodshed. The payout on this job was too great to walk away from, but he had no intention of rushing toward the same fate as the others. Instead, he settled into the hunt, taking his time to read the battlefield. Valkyr 7 had been abandoned by any governing authority long ago, but the remnants of its industrial past still clung to life. Hollowed-out factories stood like skeletal remains. Rusting walkways stretched over deep ravines, and subterranean tunnels carved through the rock like veins beneath the surface. The settlement itself was nothing more than a husk, home to outlaws, scavengers, and those too stubborn to leave. That kind of environment favored someone like Sergei, someone who could turn shadows into weapons, someone who understood that a battlefield was more than just a location. It was a tool. Drathos activated his comms, his voice a quiet rasp. Move in slow. If you rush him, you're dead. His men acknowledged, fanning out through the ruins, moving with caution. They weren't amateurs. They had fought planetary wars, executed high-value targets, survived sieges on worlds torn apart by civil war. But Drathos' new experience alone wouldn't be enough. They had numbers, firepower, and technology on their side. Sergei had instinct, training, and something far deadlier, a complete understanding of what he was up against. The first of Drathos's men died without a sound. A single suppressed round found the gap between his armor plates, dropping him instantly. The rest of the team reacted with the precision of hardened soldiers, taking cover and scanning the rooftops. But Sergei had already moved. A second man fell, his throat opened by a monofilament wire that hadn't been there a moment ago. Then the real assault began. Explosions rocked the narrow alleys, not crude pipe bombs, but strategically placed charges designed to control movement, to force them into positions Sergei had already chosen. The ruins became a maze of shifting dust and collapsing structures. Drathos gritted his teeth. This was no desperate last stand. This was a calculated dismantling of his force. Sergei was hunting them. Drathos activated his infrared visor, sweeping the area for heat signatures, but Sergei wasn't leaving anything to chance. The environment itself was working against them. Fire from the explosions, heat from exposed machinery, all creating false readings. It was deliberate, another layer of misdirection. A scream cut through the chaos as another soldier was pulled into the shadows. The team tightened formation, their weapons tracking every movement, but Sergei wasn't giving them a clear target. Drathos took a steadying breath. He had underestimated just how deep this man's training ran. Then silence. The dust settled. The echoes of gunfire faded. They were 5 men down. Sergei hadn't taken a single hit. Drathos adjusted his grip on his rifle, scanning the ruins. He had expected resistance, but not this. Sergei wasn't just winning, he was controlling every aspect of the fight. Drathos tapped his comm again. Regroup at point 0. We aren't flushing him out, he's controlling the field. The surviving enforcers fell back, forming a tight perimeter. They had to change tactics. Rushing him wasn't working, and if they kept pushing blindly, they'd be corpses before the hour was out. Drathos switched to an encrypted channel, reaching out beyond Valkyr 7. This is Bloodhound. We need backup. Now. The response came almost instantly. Acknowledged. Syndicate reinforcements en route. Drathos exhaled slowly. It wasn't defeat. Not yet. He had simply recognized the nature of the fight. Sergei wasn't an ordinary human, and this was far from over. The transport vessel tore through the lower atmosphere of Valkyr 7, its engines screaming against the dust-choked winds. Reinforcements had arrived, 20 elite syndicate enforcers, clad in reinforced combat armor, each one worth a fortune in blood money. They carried the finest weaponry credits could buy, rifles tuned for armor-piercing precision, grenade launchers designed to turn cover into dust. Their orders were simple. Kill the target, retrieve the body, and make an example of him. Sergei Mikhailov watched from the shadows of a ruined watchtower as the mercenaries disembarked. They moved efficiently, spreading out into fire teams, their visors scanning the ruins for heat signatures, motion, anything that betrayed his presence. He saw how they covered one another's flanks, how they moved with the discipline of seasoned killers. These were not the reckless thugs he had dispatched earlier. They knew what they were doing. That meant they would be slower, more methodical, but not less dangerous. Drathos stood at the center of the formation, his weapon held low, his eyes cold as he surveyed the field. He had learned his lesson. This was no longer a game of pursuit. It was a war of attrition. Sergei could feel the shift in tactics, the careful, deliberate way they advanced. The net was closing, and they were leaving him fewer and fewer ways out. Good. He hadn't come to Valkyr 7 to run. A flicker of movement caught Sergei's eye. A sniper, perched high on the skeletal remains of an old refinery, his scope sweeping the ruins. Sergei had placed himself in the sniper's blind spot, the angles carefully considered long before the mercenary had even landed. He lined up his own shot, exhaling slowly. A single suppressed round whispered through the air, striking the sniper just beneath the visor. The body slumped forward, rifle clattering uselessly against the steel beams. Sergei moved before the body hit the ground. The syndicate enforcers reacted instantly. They didn't panic. They didn't hesitate. They adjusted their formation, ducking into cover, suppressing fire riddling the area Sergei had occupied a moment earlier. Drathos barked orders, and his men responded with lethal precision. Sergei darted through the ruins, using the dust and debris to stay ahead of their scopes. He could hear the shift in their strategy. Smoke rounds fired into the alleys, drones deployed overhead to track movement patterns. They weren't trying to flush him out anymore. They were boxing him in, cutting off routes of escape, tightening their grip until he had nowhere left to run. They were good, But he was better. Sergei had spent years in environments far worse than this, hunted by enemies far more ruthless. He had fought in frozen wastelands where the cold could kill before a bullet did, in dense jungles where the humidity drowned men in their own sweat, in cities where death lurked behind every shattered window. He had survived each time, not because he was stronger, not because he was faster, but because he understood the nature of war. War wasn't about who had the better weapons. It was about control. A flash grenade detonated behind him, the concussive force rattling through the ruins. A second later, boots pounded against the dirt, two enforcers moving to flank him. Sergei didn't hesitate. He launched himself forward, catching the first man mid-step, a jagged combat knife punching through the thin mesh beneath his helmet. The second enforcer barely had time to react before Sergei twisted the corpse into his line of fire. The moment of hesitation was enough. Sergei's pistol coughed twice, both rounds striking center mass. More shouts. More movement. The rest of the team was closing in. Sergei didn't stay to greet them. He darted into the tunnels beneath the settlement, a labyrinth of rusted pipes and collapsed passageways. He had mapped this ground days ago, memorizing the twists and turns, the dead ends and escape points. The syndicate enforcers were entering blind. They followed, but Sergei had already set his traps. The first pressure plate detonated as expected, the blast filling the tunnel with fire and debris. A choke point collapsed behind them, sealing them in with him. Now it was no longer 20 against 1. Now it was 20 against the dark. The air grew thick with dust, the glow of visor displays flickering as interference signals scrambled their HUDs. Sergei moved through the chaos like a ghost. A knife in the dark, a suppressed shot from the shadows, a sudden brutal strike from above. One by one, the numbers dwindled. Drathos fought to maintain order, his voice cutting through the confusion, but even he knew this was no longer a battlefield. This was a graveyard. By the time the last shot echoed through the tunnels, only two figures remained standing. Sergei Mikhailov and Drathos. The bounty hunter exhaled, gun held steady, eyes locked on the shadow before him. Sergei tilted his head slightly, blood dripping from his blade. Drathos had been a hunter his entire life. For the first time, he felt like prey. Drathos gripped his weapon with steady hands, but he knew it wouldn't matter. The tunnel was silent except for the slow, deliberate footsteps of the man before him. Sergei Mikhailov moved without urgency, stepping over the bodies with the ease of a predator accustomed to slaughter. Blood soaked the floor, pooling in uneven rivulets where the jagged stone caught it. The air smelled of gunpowder and death. Drathos had always prided himself on control. He dictated the terms of his hunts, tracked his prey with patience, never acted out of impulse. But now, in this suffocating space where the dead outnumbered the living, he felt something unfamiliar clawing at his throat. Uncertainty. Sergei stopped a few feet away, his pistol held at his side, grip relaxed. There was no arrogance in his posture, no cruel amusement in his expression, just cold efficiency. "You're the last one," Sergei said, voice even. Drathos didn't answer. He already knew how this was supposed to end. He had watched Sergei operate, seen the precision of his kills, the effortless way he dismantled his enemies. The others had died quickly, most without realizing their mistake until it was too late. And yet, Drathos was still standing. Sergei studied him for a long moment, then holstered his weapon. It wasn't mercy. It wasn't hesitation. It was an evaluation. Drathos tightened his grip on his rifle, but he didn't raise it. He had been in this game long enough to recognize an unwinnable fight. Sergei had read him from the start, dissected his tactics, anticipated his responses. He wasn't just dealing with a soldier. He was dealing with someone who had mastered the art of survival. Sergei took a step closer, and Drathos felt his pulse spike. "You're not like the others," Sergei said. "You think before you act. You learn from mistakes." Drathos forced himself to hold the man's gaze. "That's why I'm still alive." Sergei nodded slightly. For now. Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken truths. Drathos had spent his life hunting men. He had never once questioned the contracts, never cared about the faces of those he eliminated. But standing here, knee-deep in the wreckage of his own failed operation, he realized that Sergei wasn't just another target. There was a reason the bounty had been so high. Drathos exhaled slowly. "Who put the price on your head?" Sergei tilted his head, as if debating whether to answer. Then he sighed, almost amused. "Someone who should have left me buried in the past." The words carried weight. Drathos had hunted long enough to recognize the edges of a deeper war, the kind that didn't end with a single kill. Sergei stepped past him, moving toward the exit. Drathos didn't try to stop him. He had his answer. The bounty hadn't been about money. It had been about fear. Someone out there, someone powerful, had looked at Sergei Mikhailov and seen a threat so great that they had tried to turn the entire underworld against him. And they had failed. Drathos lowered his weapon. He had no illusions about mercy. Sergei wasn't sparing him out of kindness. He was leaving him alive for a reason. A message. Drathos would carry the story of what had happened here. He would spread the truth. The galaxy had come for Sergei Mikhailov. And Sergei Mikhailov was coming for them.